Interesting. There we go. Welcome once again to the Advent Media Connect. I'm your host, James Devalon. It is an honor to be here with you tonight. We're going to have a really good discussion tonight. I was able to track Dr. Tim Perenich to assist us today with a very important discussion that happened, I would say maybe a month ago on the YouTube channel Redacted. I love Redacted. But one of the things that was presented had to do with the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the health message, the pyramid, Dr. Kellogg, and some other things. There was some truth there, and there were also some errors. So I decided to find someone who knows much more than I do when it comes to that situation here. So Dr. Tim Perenich, welcome to the channel. Thanks for being here, my brother. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. Hope you're doing well, and we'll have a nice discussion.
Yes. We going somewhere today. So we're not going to waste any time. Let me have a word of prayer once again, and then we're going to watch the video together. Let us pray. Father, we thank you. We pray that you may speak to our hearts tonight. Give us wisdom, knowledge, and understanding of your word, and even more, help us to make sense of the things we're going to be discussing tonight. And as we share it with those that are listening, we pray that you would enlighten and open the eyes of God's people. We pray that truth will conquer hearts as well. In Christ's precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, well, let me turn it over to the video here. So let's watch this video first. And after we're done, we're going to address that so at least we get full context. All right.
Story about why we have a food pyramid. Well, this is a fun story about why we have a food pyramid and why it has looked like it has since the early 90s and then subsequently led to skyrocketing rates of diabetes. One of the lesser known influences behind those guidelines comes from a small Christian denomination, and its role is rarely discussed. In the beginning of the show, I asked people to guess who it was. It wasn't Jehovah's Witnesses. It wasn't Mormons. It is not the Catholics. I'm going to tell you in just a second. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, along with the Department of Agriculture this week, rolled out this brand new food pyramid. It's basically an inversion of our old one. It says that your diet should be made of mostly healthy fats, protein and dairy, vegetables and fruits, whole foods. If you go to realfood.com, it's a beautiful site, actually. And the government has all kinds of tips on how to eat real unprocessed foods, low in sugar and other types of processed grains. The old food pyramid was A-okay with processed grains, spaghetti, breads, crackers even. Like literally the government was telling you to make most of your diet out of crackers. Look down there is saltines. There's no nutritional value in that. That's a way to get diabetes because it's a constant insulin spike and have very little dairy and meat. Why was it recommended? Who ever thought that it was preferable to eat breads and pasta as the main course of your meal and suffer this constant elevated glycemic spike? Well, this is an interesting story. Most of it told by this is the way I learned it through Jane Buxton's great book, The Great Plant-Based Con. And I'm going to summarize it for you. But I have many times recommended that you read this book, and here is another time. So this is not the only story of how profitable processed foods came to dominate the American diet, but it is a big one. In 1863, a woman named Ellen G. White said that God gave her a message in a vision, and that message was that humans should eat what she called the Garden of Eden diet. By that, she meant fruits, nuts, vegetables, and seeds. And no alcohol, no tobacco, no meat, and very little dairy. This was part of the religion she would go out on to found. It was the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Did any of you get that right? Anyone in the chat? Seventh-day I saw a few, you did. Now, she founded this church in Battle Creek, Michigan. One of the families that would help her establish the church, the dad was a man named John Preston Kellogg. Do you recognize that name? You probably do if you've ever been in an American supermarket. Kellogg had 11 children. One of them, John Harvey Kellogg, as a young man, was given a job to typeset the books of Ellen White. And so her Seventh-day Adventist books and her temperance movement were what he would typeset. And back then, this is the 1800s, you had to letter by letter. So he was clearly reading the books and heavily influenced by the temperance movement. The temperance reformers believed that citizens were plagued by disease because of overstimulation and immoral behavior. So they set out to curb these things by abstaining from alcohol and meat, processed. I lost my way. I was going to say, from abstaining from alcohol and meat and practicing sexual restraint and promoting a balance between exercise, rest, and cleanliness. They were also very big on preventing masturbation. John Harvey Kellogg also typeset books on that subject too that told mothers that it was their responsibility to stop their sons from masturbating or else they would suffer from headaches, weak backs, spinal illnesses, and blindness. That's where we get that joke that if you do that, you'll go blind. That came from the temperance movements. They literally said this in books. So books about this movement would influence Kellogg, and it would become his life's purpose, which motivated him to make these bland tasting cereals and prescribe a vegetarian diet. By 1882, he invented the cornflake, and by the early 1890s, he would bring it to market with his brother, Will. He actually invented more than just breakfast cereal. That was just their most profitable. He had a whole line of he had over 30 patents, including the first veggie burger. Now, the question is, Americans at the time were not eating this. Why would they choose to? Why would you want to eat this instead of bacon and eggs that they were eating? Well, a lot of that is because of the Seventh-day Adventists. They had secured appointments within dietary organizations in the government for decades. One of them was Lena Cooper. She was a protege of Kellogg and his wife. The Kellogg's had a cooking school, and their students went on to develop nursing schools focused on nutrition. Cooper graduated from one of those and went on to establish the American Dietetic Association. She served as on the staff of the Surgeon General, and she created the Department of Dietetics at the National Institute of Health. There are many other Seventh-day Adventists who would then continue to influence the plant-based diet, like this guy, Harry Miller. He was also a Seventh-day Adventist and a missionary in China. That's how he came up with the idea of soy milk. Did you know that came from a Chinese missionary, or an American missionary in China? Now, this influence continues all the way through until in 1988, the American Dietary Association issued a formal acceptance of vegetarianism. Of the 9 reviewers on that board, 8 of them were vegetarians, 5 were Seventh-day Adventists. The other 3 were vegetarians, but not religiously associated. And one was not a vegetarian, but he was funded by Coca-Cola. And then we get this, 4 years later, the original USDA food pyramid in 1992. Now, I'm not saying that the Seventh-day Adventists were the only influence in the government development of that monstrosity. There were other stories to be told, but we know those stories. We're told them a lot. The sugar lobby, the soda lobby, the seed lobby, who benefited from that? We know those stories. This one, I feel like most of us really don't. Like, what about you boys? Did you guys know this about Kellogg's?
Yes, I mean, I took a nutrition class in college, specifically.
I watched a documentary.
A documentary. Okay. All right. So this is something that maybe some of you know, but some of you might not. Now, did you also know, though, that the Seventh-day Adventists still own quite a few food brands, including Sanitarium, which is the largest cereal producer in Australia. They make Weetabix. You might have heard of this. Australians like to talk about Weetabix. They also make Vegemite. As in, he just smiled and gave me a Vegemite sandwich. That's what this is. It's made by the Seventh-day Adventists who believe that you shouldn't eat meat because of the temperance movement. In the U.S., they own Worthington, which makes plant-based sandwich meats, and Cedar Lake, which makes beans, rice, and sugar and coffee. Now, most of these companies don't have to pay taxes because they're on their profits because they're owned by a church. The vegetarian diet is still very much outwardly promoted by the Seventh-day Adventists. Here's their website. Now, what people may not know, not only in their influence in the American diet, but also in sort of overreaching in all areas of American healthcare, because they run large hospital systems still, such as the Advent Health, which is really big here in Colorado. David, you've seen it, right? These Advent Health is one of the biggest health systems. Did you know that's owned by the Adventists?
I did not.
Yes, it is. They also run universities, medical schools, research centers. They publish peer-reviewed research on nutrition. They have still quite a lot of influence in public health. Now, I'm not saying maybe they don't believe this. They probably really do, right? But this is it's their underlying religious philosophy that's influencing their research and products, and then is put on the American consumer, whether we know it or not. So this is a story worth telling because the Adventist church population is quite small. It's about 1.2 to 1.3 million members. It's about the size of like Jehovah's Witnesses. It's a small portion of the American population. That I estimate that at about 0.4% of Americans, but they have such disproportional influence in dietary decisions in the U.S. government and healthcare decisions. So, it's interesting to know that. This is a story worth knowing when you hear the government pushing vegetarian and grain-based diets. Where is that influence coming from? Now, RFK Jr. has chosen not to do that. And what he says is more evidence-based food pyramid. But how do we know that the current food pyramid now is not shaped by profit or ideological pressures? Well, we don't. Not with certainty. What we do know is that human beings do require complete proteins, bioavailable fats, and essential micronutrients for growth, repair, and metabolic function. And this pyramid does clearly promote those things instead of processed foods. So we can feel better about that. But will there be people who profit from this shift? Well, almost certainly. That's why this scrutiny shouldn't just stop because of these new guidelines. We should always be paying attention to who benefits and what power they yield. So let me know what you think of this in the comments, and if this is a story you'd ever heard before.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about this. I want to hear your thought, Dr. Tim Perenich.
Yeah.
Did you hear some truth in here? Did you hear some propaganda as well?
It's really hard to say. I mean, there's definitely some things that are true, but then there's a lot that really isn't. I think the hardest thing for me is that there's this movement now where we want to demonize eating grains and things like that, and we're pretending like somehow meat has always been a healthy food and eating this way has always been healthy.
Yeah.
And I just have to point out that, like, Loma Linda, the Adventist Medical School worked with investigators from other universities who are not Adventist, and they've done the longitudinal studies on Seventh-day Adventists. Even the guy who wrote the book on the blue zones went to Loma Linda, and he demonstrated that the way that they eat over there, which, they have a couple of advantages. One, California's a mild climate, so people get a lot of exercise, but they eat a plant-based diet, and they're very serious about it. They have the College of Lifestyle Medicine over there, which you don't have to be an Adventist to be a part of, but a number of doctors have joined it, and they have found that you can fight most chronic diseases using the lifestyle that Seventh-day Adventists use. So just to sit there and say, oh, well, they had this, incredible influence on the food pyramid is really not telling the truth about the whole story. And to sit there and say, well, it's their ideas which created the last food pyramid was the problem. And that's really not the case. I think the person who wrote the original book, which she is quoting from, I think the person may have had an axe to grind or just wanted to do something that was extraordinary or controversial to sell books, because it's not really with the truth. So, really, realistically, the first food pyramid starts in 1894. Well, it begins in 1894 with a gentleman by the name of Atwater. And so Mr. Atwater, he is a chemist, and his name is Wilbur Atwater. He's a chemist, and he tries to develop a way to test the basal metabolic rate. So this was the first idea, figuring out how many calories do you need a day to survive? What is the minimum? What do you need to survive? And so he did all these implementations, and he worked with the Department of Agriculture, because they were trying to figure out what would constitute a good diet. So
Yeah.
that was some of the earliest research in there. It is interesting to note that, a lot of times we sit there and we think that Adventists came up with this whole vegetarian thing on their own. They did not.
Mm.
The whole vegetarian thing started even before there was an Adventist church.
Yeah.
In Great Britain, 1845, there was a group of people who were the anti-vivisectionist
Mm.
society, and they also believed in vegetarian eating. They were not for dissecting animals while they were alive,
Mm.
so they began to eat a plant-based diet. And there were evangelicals who were also eating a plant-based diet in 1845. And the reason being, their reasoning is that they wanted to eat a diet that you would be eating in heaven. They believe that the Edenic diet,
Mm.
which is a vegetarian diet, which is established in Genesis 1:29, that diet was the diet you should be eating preparing for heaven. So
Correct.
this was even before Seventh-day Adventists. Another proto-reformer is Sylvester Graham. And many think of graham crackers and s'mores and things like that. And that is sort of a bastardization of Graham's teachings. And they go,
Mm.
well, he just meant eating coarse bread. Well, Graham wasn't just about eating coarse bread. Graham also believed, like the evangelical vegetarians in Great Britain, he believed that the best way to get health is to eat a diet closer to what the original human beings ate. That
Yeah.
is Adam and Eve. If you can get closer to that, you're
Mm.
going to live longer, you're going to be healthier. And he wasn't alone. There was a Catholic priest named Father Knipe, and there are centers in Germany to this very day called Father Knipe centers. And
Mm.
people go for walks in cold water, they do massages, they do sunlight, they do a bunch of stuff, but it used to be, I don't know if it still does, but they used to emphasize eating coarse black bread, very hearty, very very tough to get down because it was so loaded with fiber and B vitamins and a number of nutrients. And Father Knight did that. He was very big on hydrotherapy and very big on eating a coarse diet. So the whole concept that somehow Adventists came up with this vegetarian diet on their own is foolish. There's even a book published which is trying to attack and undermine Seventh Day Adventists. And ironically, the book demonstrates that other groups were coming up with many of the very characteristics of our health message, which we eventually adopted. And so there were a number of people who were existing at that time who were hydropaths, eclectic doctors, homeopathic doctors, who all were coming to these ideas that eventually coalesced in the Seventh Day Adventist Church. So to sit there and say that is the height of ignorance. I could keep going, but I'll pause so you can hear some of your thoughts. But I just want to say this: the first sort of food pyramid comes out in about 1972, and it was response to what they had seen during World War II. So
Mm.
a lot of people had to live on rations, and they
Mm.
wanted to figure out, well, what is the minimum amount of food that you could give someone and maintain health? And so we learned, or at least the world learned through what Europe went through, is what is the minimal amount that you need before you get malnutrition. So there was a lot of research and interest in that, and it actually started in Sweden, not in the United States. So there was a lot of understanding. And what's interesting is they found that in certain countries where they restricted sugar or restricted meat, a lot of the chronic diseases went down because of rations. So they said, well, wait, we got to come up with something better. That was the first. And I could go on about Kellogg and all the other stuff, but I'll give you a moment to sort of reflect a little bit.
Whew. Wow. Um, guys in the chat, did you even know this? We oftentimes pride ourselves when it comes to the health message because of actually the way I think we orchestrated and actually have a doctrinal position on it. But did you know the entire history of where that came from? And I think the same is true for just about every single doctrine of the
Yep.
Seventh-day Adventist Church. I think apart from the investigative judgment that is very unique to Adventism, everything else has either been passed down from in a denomination or some sort that we're already practicing that, or maybe someone else came to the conviction before Seventh-day Adventism. So we're not it's not like we were raised in a vacuum or something like that. But
Right. In other words, what we believe is no private interpretation. To sit there and say, well, Ellen White came up with this and
yeah,
John Harvey Kellogg, look, we'll go through the presentation, but I'll show you all the people who wrote an obituary or wrote a eulogy for John Harvey Kellogg, which were published in the newspapers after he died. He didn't get worldwide fame and accolades from medical societies all over the world because he was just a moron. One of my favorite stories about John Harvey Kellogg is that he was an innovator in surgery. He believed in aseptic surgery, so he was very much concerned with making sure that there was, and these are things we take for granted now, but making sure that you had sanitary garments, you had a sterile field. Steamed, cleaned your instruments, so there was no way of bacteria. He was very much into that, and he was very, very good, and he was a pioneer in it. As a matter of fact, she mentioned all the patents that he had. Well, Kellogg actually had patents on performing heart surgery. He actually had patent certain procedures that were known by him. Now, I don't know if they still do them anymore because that's not in my wheelhouse, but I know that that was the case. So, anyways, Dr. Mayo, who the Mayo Clinic is named after, who I believe was in Ohio, he would get patients, and in those days, you would lift up someone's shirt, and you would see these terrible scars that didn't, from surgery where it didn't heal. There were weeping wounds and things like that, and they would come to him to have him revise what someone else already did, or he would follow up with someone who had surgery, and so his patients would come in, and he'd have them remove their shirt, and he would look, and he would say to the patients, he would say, and he was right every time. He'd say, "Hey, I see your scar here. Did you go to John Harvey Kellogg's clinic in Battle Creek, Michigan, and you have surgery there?" They say, "Yeah, how do you know? Was it in my report?" He goes, "No. I could look at the scar and I saw how nice and thin it was and how it followed along the train of anatomy, where it follows these lines very nicely. And I know there's only one other guy who does it like I do it, and that's him." So again, to sit there and say, "Oh, Kellogg and masturbation," man, they always like to bring that up. It's like a red herring. I guess the world has come to the conclusion that masturbation is good for you. So anyone who said that masturbation was bad is a quack. What's so funny about that is that Christians were saying that for a long time, and Adventists were very strong in it. We felt that it was a debilitating sin and that it ruins the lives of both men and women, and it ruins their future marital life as well. And I know that that seems backwards to many today because we're like, oh, it doesn't really matter, and we have no fear of God. The Bible doesn't mean anything to us, and we're in such a sexual permissive culture that this type of talk just seems like the ravings of a lunatic. However, what's interesting now is that a body of research is developing where they're talking about the how masturbation destroys your physiology, how masturbation prevents men from having an erection when they're actually with the partner, their married wife. They can't even do it anymore because they've ruined and warped their mind through masturbation. There's a whole bunch of other studies showing that it messes with your hormones, messes with your brain. Andrew Huberman, who is not a Seventh Day Adventist, who works at Stanford, talked about how going on and looking at pornography and masturbating actually depletes your dopamine stores, and it ruins the reward work uh, pattern or pathway in your brain, so that you no longer are willing to delay gratification anymore, and it makes you weaker mentally. I mean, he went on and said it. He's not some religious lunatic, but the point is that I if you were to go back and you were to read what they said, there's certainly some things that they took too far. I've read some of the things that they took too far back then. But when you think about some of the other things they said, you go, honestly, they were right. But you won't get that. It's just a soundbite to say, oh, they were against that. They're crazy. And the idea that they would be against caffeine and alcohol and tobacco, well, I don't know how that is seemingly strange when Adventists were the leaders in
Yeah.
that sphere. I have to make this point that the Adventist health message uh, caused Adventists in the early 1880s to be against tobacco, whether it be chewing, snorting, or smoking it. And we were very consistent on that. We to this
Yeah.
day we fund stop smoking clinics and all that other stuff, which is great. What's interesting is that around the 1930s, that all changed in medicine. People say, there was a big lawsuit, I want to say in the 80s or 90s, and it was about, smoking and all this other stuff. And doctors said, well, we didn't know, we didn't know, we didn't know. But the truth of the matter is, if you read some of the early publications, not only did Seventh day Adventist physicians knew, but other physicians knew that it wasn't good for you. But the question is why did they forget that cigarette smoking wasn't good for you? Well, it's very simple. And this guy's going to come in handy again. It starts with Edward Bernays. And you're probably familiar with Edward Bernays.
Yeah.
He's the fa-
The
he's the
father.
father of propaganda.
Yeah. Yeah.
He wrote a book called Propaganda. And in his
Hmm.
book, it explains how he was able to get women to start smoking. What people don't understand is that in the early days, the United States, men smoked,
Hmm.
but women did not. And one of the reasons that women didn't is they thought that men didn't like it, and men did not like it if women smoked.
Mm.
So they didn't. And so these tobacco companies said, hey, half of America is happy to smoke, or at least the men, that they're happy to smoke, but women don't. And we have to fix that. So the first thing that Edward Bernays did is he decided to go, he told Lucky Strike that they needed to change their cigarette box packaging and choose colors that matched popular women's fashion. True story. That's what he did. And then he said, I know we're still not getting enough women smoking. They were smoking the time. I know what we'll do. We'll tap into the women's liberation movement. We'll go to the suffragettes and all these women advocating being free from the home and all this. And he went to them and said, "Look, the tobacco companies are willing to dump a ton of money into your crusade, but we need your help." And they go, "What do you need?" And they said, "Well, you need to tell your female leaders that they need to be seen smoking, carrying cigarettes as a symbol of freedom. That you're lighting up as a symbol of your emancipation. No man's going to hold you down because you're holding your cigarette torch, which is a symbol of liberty." And so he convinced, and so women started smoking en masse because they thought it was a symbol of liberty, it was a symbol of being equal with men. See, men smoke and we can smoke, and it worked splendidly. And so they were making all this money, but the tobacco company, as you can imagine, is never happy with just a lot of money. They need a lot more money. And so they went to Bernays and said, "We're getting most people smoking, but we need more help in this. We need more people to smoke. Is there any way you can get like an expert, someone who knows something about health, to endorse cigarettes?" And so Edward Bernays figured out a plan. And what he did is he went to the American Medical Association. He said, "Hey, here's the deal. We need your endorsement on cigarettes." And so they began to have booths at the American Medical Association while making generous contributions to them. And doctors would be given packs of cigarettes when they would come to these meetings. And then eventually doctors began to say, yeah, smoking helps your throat. It helps you lose weight. Again, appealing to women and vanity, helps you lose weight, helps clear your throat out. And then they had a whole campaign with Camel, Lucky Strike. What cigarette do you choose, doctor? All of them over and over again. But it was all done because of Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays did that, and Adventists were like, "Don't smoke, don't smoke, don't smoke" the whole time.
Yeah.
So while medicine was all about endorsing smoking, Adventists were not. So it's an interesting It's an interesting point that they make there. The Adventist influence. I'll get back to the eating in just a moment, but might want to reflect on that.
Wow. That I didn't know the connection. Well, I knew about Edward Bernays, but I didn't know there was a connection with him in the medical system of his day.
Yes.
I didn't know that. I knew he was doing this for propaganda, just to raise the sale of the tobacco companies at the time, but I didn't know there was a medical connection to that, because
Oh yeah.
I did know they were recommending cigarettes as a way. I mean, the medical system today, even today, nothing has changed. If you look at the way the medical system takes care of cancer and many of the things, you can't even say that on YouTube now because it's considered, it's the stuff these doctors will recommend, even doing COVID, the stuff they recommend is like, this stuff don't work. Why you keep doing it? Because when big dollar is behind the medical system, those doctors tend to compromise and go along with the money. So that's why you don't get much major doctors standing firm against the system. And again, they're also careful being blacklisted. Imagine going to school for 12 something years, and then all of a sudden, just because you did not go along with something, you lose your entire credentials. And so they're afraid of that too. I can understand that side of the story. Right. Can you comment a little bit about the temperance movement that she made reference to in relation to the Seventh Adventist Church? Because not everything in the temperance movement we agreed to. Some of the temperance movement were pushing Sunday laws and other things like that. But we did side with them for the purpose of abstinence from alcohol and so on. But she did make it appear that the temperance movement was a Seventh-day Adventist movement.
Yeah, no, definitely. It definitely was not. The temperance movement was not. We endorsed it because, what a lot of people don't understand, because we have sanitized alcoholism. I mean, we literally have. I mean, if you watch, I mean, I didn't watch the Super Bowl, but I imagine if you did, there were probably advertisements for beer. And if you watch TV at all, which I try to stay away, you'll see advertisements for wine. And now it's even more subtle. if you watch a movie or something on Netflix, they'll try to do what they call product placement. So like the characters will be drinking alcohol, and it's a way of and maybe they'll hold the bottle or whatever it is. And even people endorse this, even on YouTube and other places. And so we live in a culture where we've sanitized alcoholism. But, one of the things that people noticed back then was people drinking themselves to death. People, when mother stayed at home and took care of the kids and dad would go work and then he would come home and get completely drunk or not come home and get drunk. It was a terrible it was a terrible scourge on society. And so this was one of the reasons why Adventists and others were so against it. We were against it because we felt that we looked at the Bible, and you look about the story of Nadab and Abihu, and how if you read the story, they're not fall down drunk. If they were falling and stumbling, their father, their father Aaron would have stopped them from going into the tabernacle, but they were not. They were impaired just enough that they felt that they were entitled to switch out the common fire with the holy fire, and who would know? I mean, again, think about it. It was a calculated move on their part. Like, hey, why do we got to do this? It's just easier to do the other one. And of course, they were struck dead. You can read right after that passage where it literally says that you should not take anything that prevents your ability to discern between the holy and common, between good and evil. That was the whole concept. So, anyways, the point, the driving the point home with the whole alcoholism, what's interesting is that we know today for a fact that there's a dose dependent relationship with alcohol and cancer. For every drink that you take, there's a relationship in it growing your cancer. That there are more people who die today of alcohol related injuries or alcohol related events, whether it be car accidents, boat accidents, or even compromising their health than ever before. In the UK, they drink so much there that like during the time when everyone's going out and going to the clubs, they have record visits to the ER of people with alcohol poisoning. So we've sanitized it to make people feel good, and it's like, oh well, prohibition didn't work. So Adventists who are against alcohol, that's bad. But many Christians were against it all over the world, even because they just felt that this wasn't good. And Catholics worked very hard to carve out an exemption for their wine which they drink during communion service. So, but many people were against it because they saw this wasn't very good at all, Adventists included. But again, the point I make here is that Adventists called their shot early, only to see that what they've said in the past has actually grown better over time. Better over time. So, I get it. It's controversial, raises people's eyebrows to think that this small Christian denomination is somehow has an overabundance of influence when it comes to the food pyramid, but that just simply is not the case. It just isn't. Like she said other things that didn't make any sense in there, but like I said, when you're trying to get clicks, and I'm not blaming her for that. I just think she read that book, and that book has a lot of historical inaccuracy.
Correct. Correct. All right. I know you have a presentation. I'm gonna let you go ahead and share that, and then
Yeah.
we'll do some questions at the end.
Okay.
This is great.
No problem.
All right.
All right. So we were talking a little bit about John Harvey Kellogg, and this is a two-part presentation. We're only doing part two because we would not have time. Maybe another time we could do part one,
Okay.
but so one of the things about the whole presentation that the woman did is that it's always John Harvey Kellogg's bad because he was an Adventist. And what I want you to show you is that the thing that they never bring up, like they'll bring up his cornflakes, and let me be very clear, Will Keith, who was not really an Adventist, founded Kellogg's company there. And many of the companies that she mentioned in there that still make veggie meat and stuff like that, they are not owned by Adventists anymore. They sold a lot of those off a long time ago. So the Adventist church has very little interest in some of these companies. There's a few out there that are marginally owned by Adventists or that have some maybe controlling stock or whatever, but very few in the world. And that was actually not the plan. The plan was the church was to use these things as a tool of evangelism and employ other people, but that doesn't exist. But they always condemning that aspect of John Harvey Kellogg, and they never mention any of the things that I'm going to mention here. Because John Harvey Kellogg is a complex man with an incredible history. Tomes and tomes of books could be written about him. I think Richard Schwartz did his dissertation on not even the whole life of Kellogg, and it's at University of Michigan, and it's incredible all the research that people can find because he wrote so much and he was such an incredible influence. But I wanted to go over a bit of this history that most people don't know about John Harvey Kellogg because I think that not bringing this up is really the problem. Because the things that he did while he was a Seventh Adventist were very commendable. And the things that he did after he left the church are horrifying. And that's where I want you to see. And I also want you to see that as he went, medicine went with him. Medicine went the same way. So we'll see. So this is a blurb from Good Health magazine published by Kellogg, and I want you to know that he was very much ahead of the curve. This is published in February 1913. He's not an Adventist at this point, but he talks about the intestinal flora. He was an early leader on probiotics. He believed that if you could give people the right probiotics, you could go to a place, a madhouse, where the people there, and if you gave them all the right probiotics and balanced their gut bacteria and helped them, you could clear out half of the inhabitants there. He believed that it was that powerful, that mind gut relationship, that if you could get the right bugs in there, you could get the right type of thinking. And so this is something he talks about with Pasteur and the intestinal flora, but this is way ahead of the curve. I mean, we were not big into probiotics until maybe what, 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I mean, he was saying this in 1913, and now there's probiotics in your yogurt, probiotics in your drinks, probiotics and coconut water, probiotics and everything. Every supplement, they're putting it in it, but he was already ahead of the curve back, and this is even earlier than February 1913. I'm just putting this article up. He was way ahead of it. As a matter of fact, there was a great story about him. There was a woman in Canada. Her and her husband had 5 kids, and this is before the hormones and things like that. And they had 5 kids, and she was unable to produce enough milk for all the babies. They had quintuplets, and she was unable to produce enough milk, and the babies were failing to thrive, and she could not eat enough to give herself the nutrients to give to her kids. Most people don't realize that breastfeeding burns a lot of calories and takes a lot of nutrients from mom to feed a baby. And so if you imagine having to feed 5 at once, you're pretty much worn out. And so Kellogg heard about this, and he created a type of soy milk. And again, he wasn't the inventor of soy milk. The Chinese have been using it for a long time, and Harvey Miller did not bring it to the United States. That didn't happen. A long time before even any of that. And so Kellogg took the soy milk and he had added probiotics to it. And he told the woman, the mother and the father, that take a little bit of this soy milk, mix it with the breast milk, and give it to the kids, because Kellogg believed if you gave the kids the right bacteria, they would gain weight, they would get the nutrition that they needed, and all the other stuff. And sure enough, they did exactly what he said, and all 5 kids grew up to adults. So again, I just have to point this out because we're always attacking. We're saying these things, and I just have to say how far ahead of the curve he is. But this is where no one really likes to talk about this. In the same Good Health magazine in 1913, here's an article about the Utah State Board of Insanity and talking about applying eugenics. Kellogg, and this is after he left the church. So mind you, the Seventh-day Adventists were not on board with eugenics. There might have been some individually, but the church was not. And the reason why the church was not is because we didn't believe in evolution. And part of eugenics is also believing in evolution. Kellogg, and you will see this. You'll see this in there. So they began to pass laws to sterilization and things like that. And Kellogg was very much in favor of this. He publishes more articles in here talking about it, and he gives the whole point of like how they need to do this and all the laws being passed, and he's celebrating it. Like, this is very important. Again, this is again from Good Health, 1913. This is John Harvey Kellogg in 1916, the book Ideas, and he's going to talk about eugenics here as well, and he's going to talk about this idea that man through breeding can get a higher nature even. So through breeding, this can happen. And so this is what he says here. I'm just going to read a little bit. It says, it is evident that the blood counts in estimating the value of a horse, cow, a goat, or a puppy. A horse without a pedigree is a drudge, a beast of burden. A horse plus a pedigree is worth a fortune and lives in a palace. His name is written in the book, and he is expected to sustain the reputation of his family. Animal pedigree has a market value and established price. The significance of a pedigree must be at least as great as a man, or as in a cat or a poodle, and yet how little attention is given to human breeding. There are human thoroughbreds and human mongrels, but no distinction is made between them. We lack the pride of birth of lineage. The average man wouldn't know his ancestral tree if he saw it. He does not even know the name of his paternal grandmother. So again, this is the idea that, notice, you're linking humans with animals. And Kellogg did not believe in evolution while he was a Seventh-day Adventist, but he's believing in it because this justifies eugenics. Now, let's be very clear. Is there truth to mom and dad being healthy? Yes, there is. Is there truth to avoiding certain genetic diseases? Yes, there is. But let's also be very clear. There's a lot of horses that win a lot of races that don't always have the best pedigrees. There's a lot of people who accomplish a lot of things who were not born from great parents or great benefactors. And as a matter of fact, in Europe, where the elites have done a lot of breeding, where they have tried to interbreed to keep the line of royalty because they thought that was better than everyone else, they have a proportionate amount of defects and health problems because of it. So it's important to point that out. But this was gaining ground at this time. And I also want to point out that it wasn't just him. There were doctors all around the world that were supporting this, because this was considered thus saith the science. And this should always be a cautionary tale to us. When all science gets together and says this is the science, we need to really scrutinize it, because they're usually wrong. So, anyways, he says this, and he says, but a new day is dawning. Eugenics will create a new and improved human race. Registered, and I like that in quotations, registered men and women of a new aristocracy, an aristocracy of health and biologic fitness, will soon challenge the admiration of the world and become the founders of a new race of men. They really believe that. He was not alone.
Wow.
This is in 1898, and he talks about, so I want you to understand, this is when he was still an Adventist in 1898. And he talks about the same problems that we were facing at that time as they were facing in 1913, about human beings having more disease and all this other stuff. And he talks about, how human beings were created in the image of God, and how over the years they have declined and all this other stuff. And he mentions, the people, unfit having children and all this other stuff. And he talks about all of this. And he goes through the whole thing about what he should do and how we should fix it. And again, I can't read it all, but he talks about inherited traits, and even the point, where the taste for alcohol is inherited and all this stuff. He goes through all of that, and he says it's a real problem. He feels it is a real problem. He even talks about the ancient Romans and how they committed infanticide because they would get rid of the how would I put it, the undesirable parts of the population. If a child had a defect or something like that. And so he goes through this whole thing, but listen to his conclusion here, okay? Because he's going to demonstrate how Christians should view this problem of people getting sick and dying and the debility of the human race. And this is what he says. The genius of Christianity, however, so in contrast to all the pagan religions, in contrast to all the other societies which believed in killing the weakest and the unfit, he believes that Christianity had the answer. All right, so this is what he says. The genius of Christianity, however, is not the dominance of the strong, but the protection of the weak. He is the greatest who serves the most. Here seems to be the two principles at war with each other: a principle in the natural world, tending to weed out the feeble and the weakly, survival of the strongest, and the principle in the spiritual world demanding the sacrifice of the strong for the weak. If to be perfectly natural is to be truly spiritual, as some writers believe, there ought to be some way of reconciling these conflicting principles. It certainly will not do to maintain that quarantine law should be abolished, and that cholera, typhus, and the Black Death should be allowed to ravage densely populated cities of today as they did in those in the Middle Ages. The remedy is to be found not in the abolition of public hygiene, but in the cultivation of private hygiene. More attention must be given to the training of the individual. Men and women must be made to see that the prevalent conditions of our modern civilization are anti-natural, and tend to the deterioration of the vital powers, the development of disease. So, what is his answer? His answer is the individual. Not a top down approach where you have a group of elites who decide who gets to have children, who doesn't. It's just like with conversion, it starts with the individual. And this is one of the reasons why Adventists would have been part of any discussion about a food pyramid. I don't know if the woman that she had mentioned, what was her name? Lena, forget her name, but well, whatever her name was. But
Yeah.
I wrote it down. But anyways, the one lady she had mentioned, I don't know whether she was an Adventist or not. She's certainly trained by John Harvey Kellogg, and she did get her training under him, and she did go to other schools. But one of the reasons why one of her books that is in the Harvard Library to this very day, it's actually written to the housewife, teaching her how to make very healthy meals to build up the health of children. In other
Mm.
words, the program that Kellogg had was we need to educate people on how to
Mhm.
eat better so we can improve the human race while he was still a Seventh day Adventist, while he was still a Christian. But when he leaves the church, he's like, we need to get government to do sterilization laws, and we need to do government to create a registry of who can have children and all this other stuff. That's what he supported. So no one mentions that. No one mentions that. It's, oh, he's bad because he's an Adventist. And I say, no, look at the evil that came into his life
Yeah,
when he abandoned God.
exactly. The woman name is Lenore Cooper.
Lena Cooper, that's
Yep.
right. Lena Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes. And so anyways, her book again, and I'm not even 100% sure she's an Adventist, but she was definitely influenced by Kellogg. You can read it, and a lot of what she says there are very simple recipes and things to help mothers make healthier food for their children because it was about winning over the individual. So here he is, and now he's going full blown into eugenics. This is published in 1915, and this is in Good Health. This is a publication, and he talks about all the issues, and he's going to start talking about Galton, who is a phrenologist and also eugenist. And it's interesting. He even talks about some of the science behind phrenology, which again, another junk science, but at the time, phrenology was the powerhouse. Many of the theories of phrenology are inculcated in psychiatry today. So phrenology just didn't go away.
Mm.
That looking at bumps and stuff like that did, but this idea that you can somehow understand the mind and the heart through these different tests and things is still the idea. And it's important to note that the earliest centers of sterilization during the Third Reich were psychiatric hospitals. And again,
Mm.
eugenics was another tool that they used along the same lines of psychiatry to do it. Again, this is what I can't stand is that no one else mentions this. They will talk about, oh, he was against masturbation. We know that's great. And I'm like, wait, this is a layup here. He was for eugenics. Like
Yeah.
how are we missing the boat on this?
Yeah. This was huge.
Yeah, so anyone's ever read A Brave New World, they break up the classes of people into subgroups. So they have the alphas, the betas, I think the gammas or deltas. I don't remember. I've only cursory looked at the book. I never read through the whole thing.
Mm.
But notice that type of thinking that was published in Brave New World is here in Kellogg's plan. They have a class A, a class B, and a class C of different levels of registry of who is allowed to have children and who's allowed not to. And so again, notice what he says here. This is the idea of a new race of people. I'll just read the first paragraph. A eugenics registry would be the beginning of a new glorified human race with which sometime far down in the future will have so mastered the forces of nature that disease, degeneracy will have been eliminated. Now, here's the problem with that. This tells you that he's abandoned Christianity. Because if you read your Bible very carefully, there's something called the seven last plagues. And the first plague is boils. And if you also read your Bible carefully, it's also very serious about how if you go back and you worship idols, according to Deuteronomy, that he will put on you the diseases that were on Egypt. And this is important to note because we're told that disease and death are going to increase. Things are not going to get better. But when you believe in evolution, you believe in steering the race through human means, you believe that there's a salvation. Even climate change is almost a religion of salvation. Well, if we just have fewer children, if we drive, if we don't drive cars, if we ride bikes, if we If we allow ourselves to be taxed in credits and don't use electricity, we'll save the world. We'll have a new utopia. It can never be the case.
No.
It's two different worldviews. I mean, look at what he says here. By selective breeding, he believes that hospitals and prisons will no longer be needed, and the golden age will have been restored as its crowning result of human achievement and obedience to biologic law. Again, this is why evolutionists and people believe that if you could get in harmony with nature, you would bring about this utopia. But this can never happen. It's very clear as you read the Bible that things get worse and worse and worse, and then the Lord returns. A totally different timeline, a totally different thing. Again, this is him left the Adventist church.
Yeah.
Now,
and that's combined with his pantheistic views.
right. Well, his pantheistic views lead him to accept evolution.
Oh,
That's the thing. So what people think, so a lot of times we talk about pantheism, we're like, well, that's really bad. But what pantheism did is it undermined the foundation of the Bible. Pantheism essentially tells you that God is in you, God is in this or that. And so God no longer is a moral force of judgment. God is no longer a moral force with the Holy Spirit pricking your conscience of sin. God is just simply something to be experienced, which we can all experience, whether in nature or whether in any living thing. That's the idea. And so when you put that on the table, now you've weakened your understanding of the Bible. You've weakened it as the foundation of your faith. God can just simply be experienced. There's no judgment. Everything is good. And then eventually that leads you to the next step. Well, who needs the Bible? And then before you know it, God is just simply a vestigial part of your language and your practice.
Wow.
So I put this on here. So this is the National Conference on Race Betterment, and it goes through the dates there, 1914. And it says, published by the Race Betterment Foundation. And this was done in Battle Creek, Michigan, at the sanitarium which they rebuilt. And notice he puts a quote here by Herbert Spencer, who's Darwin's bulldog. It says, to be a good animal is the first requisite to success in life. And to be a nation of good animals is the first condition of national prosperity. Notice, we're not created in God's image. We're animals that must be subject to the herd, must be subject to guidance from the smarter animals. I don't know how that works. Don't ask it to make sense, but that's what they thought. And again, there's Herbert Spencer, and he was considered the John the Baptist, and he coined the phrase "survival of the fittest," which is horrible. Now, I want you to see this here. There is the arrow. There's Kellogg, and this is at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. This is the inside of it. Now, I just want you to think about this for a moment. This was a place at one time that people held prayer and Bible study. This was a time where people got together and they sought God's approval for what they would do. And here is Kellogg filling this very place with people who are all for eugenics. And they put this as the banquet for the National Race Betterment Society, which is the Eugenics Society. And they were celebrating Dr. Victor C. Vaughn, who was the head of the American Medical Association. So the American Medical Association loved Kellogg because Kellogg loved them because they both loved eugenics. And so here's a list of people who were there or who were either invited or part of it. And you will see people from Yale. You'll see people, how would I put it, clergy members, judges, attorneys, medical doctors, all over the place, all invited there are members of this. And I want to point this out again. When we have a sort of, I don't know, luminary scientific consensus on something, we need to be really careful. I know today we're like, oh, eugenics, that's been debunked.
Yeah.
But let me just tell you, the national proceedings of the Academy of Sciences were for it. They were all for it, and not just for it like, oh, yeah, some people like chocolate, some people like vanilla ice cream. It wasn't like that. Mm-hmm. They were promoting it vigorously.
Yeah,
just
but
like other things.
The side effect of it today is the abortion movement.
Right.
It's still a form of eugenics. So.
Right. Well, it certainly is because they purposely wanted to put it in low income areas because they felt that, well, we can't support these people. And again, what's the worst part about it is they've somehow convinced women that it's their choice when they've actually manipulated women to thinking that this is their freedom, that if they don't have this, they don't have anything in life. Like the same people who got upset, said, my body, my choice, and wore a pink hat in Washington, turned around and said, it's not your body and not your choice when it came to getting a shot. You're
Yeah.
like, well, wait a second. The shot really is my body, my choice. And the baby really isn't your body. It's just your choice. The baby is not a tumor. It's not even you. It has a different DNA, different blood type, different
Correct.
immune system. Your body doesn't even recognize a baby as self. That's why your immune system is suppressed during pregnancy for a time so that your immune system doesn't kill the baby. So yeah, we've twisted the whole thing, but
Yeah.
somehow they've convinced us otherwise.
Yeah, and also minority classes, especially among the black women, abortion is somewhere to the tune of 49 something or above. I know it might
Yeah,
not be correct. Yeah,
yeah. I
and
mean, think about it.
they're fighting like it's like, were you ending your own race here?
Yeah,
Think about it.
right.
It's such a
Think
deceptive thing.
think about how crazy it is today. We sit around and we condemn Kellogg for going after masturbation.
Hmm.
We condemn them for saying that eating a diet is going to make you less sexually promiscuous. And we, on the other hand, are sexually promiscuous and killing our children, saying that we're following the science. Like, how does that work?
It's
How is he a
just,
quack for those things, and we're like,
yeah, yeah. It's just each society knows how to sanitize their own evil. They think the
I
one
mean,
before them, we all smarter than the ones before us. Really,
yes,
like yeah,
no,
we kill the babies and
yeah,
we
yeah,
poison patients. We try to get rid of cancer that way. Then
yes,
we
yeah.
kill all their
We,
cells and leave them
uh,
completely vulnerable to any diseases. And then we say, hey, we did it. Oh,
exactly,
give me a break.
exactly. I mean, listen, there are advances, but I think overall we're
Yeah,
probably more deluded than we give ourselves credit for, realistically.
absolutely, absolutely. Yep.
So I highlighted again. Even Dr. and Mrs. Paulson were physicians. So these doctor, if you remember Paulson was an Adventist physician, and so he was listed on here. Now, what he believed, I don't know, but he was an Adventist physician, and Dr. Victor C. Vaughn, which you already mentioned, was head of the AMA, and then even Booker T. Washington. And so a lot of people think that eugenics is simply racism, and eugenics was too smart to fall into that trap. While you could say it's been applied in a racist way, that the fact of the matter is that it was never rolled out like that. It was rolled out as simply as the betterment of the human race. So you could see why they would have appealed to Booker T. Washington, and I don't know if he ever attended, but they would have appealed to anyone who was anyone because this was all about science. And so a lot of people, and keep in mind, Kellogg adopted a lot of black children. He did, and he made sure they got education. He did. He took care of them, especially when he was a Seventh Day Adventist. And he would not think that they were lesser. But the point of the matter is that this is what science does. It brings you in with all these luminaries, and people get deceived by it. So while we sit here in our seat after the big game and say, "Hey, we know better." Yeah, we know better today, but do we? Because the same type of deceptions happen to us, and we fall for it just like anyone else. So I just wanted to point that out. And there's more people. There's insurance companies. The YMCA. I mean, the YMCA was for. And listen, look at this. The
Oh my goodness.
WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Unit Union, that was also for it. So I just want you to see this. It's like we think we're so smart and that we wouldn't have fallen for it.
Yeah.
But look how many people were. And look at the list of ministers. It's against their own Bible, but they can't be bothered to read it and see where it contradicts. So
Wow.
I just have to point that out. So again, I put this here because all the things that they're talking about, the race betterment. I don't have time to read about it, but the idea that they're very thankful for Kellogg, um, doing this at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, and I just want to just highlight this point that the Battle Creek Sanitarium was built by people who sacrificed for the health message. And it was rebuilt by people who were misled, but they still sacrificed because they felt that there needed to be an institution that was going to train people to be missionaries and help people around the world. And when the Spirit of God departs from any institution or any person, that there is no depth on how dark the bottom can be. And so I'm just pointing it out that when the spirit departed from that area after a fire burned it down, and the fire clearly wasn't normal as most people think, after all that happened, you can see when God's spirit is removed, that the darkness of the darkness at the bottom is darker than you can ever imagine. And this is my point: is that this area was once a ground dedicated to God, and now it's dedicated to evolution and one of the most terrible scientific theories in history and eugenics. So again, they're talking about promoting eugenics in education and how every school needs to know about this. And I want you to see this, that every sort of trend in science, when they want to indoctrinate you, they must get hold of the educational institutions. And this is also important to know because with eugenics also came evolution. So this was another way of bringing in evolution. Eugenics is gone, but evolution has stayed. When you go to any state or public education, you must learn about evolution. Even Christian universities feel the need to have to teach evolution. And sadly, many Christian professors believe in some form of either theistic evolution or evolution, and they think that it was just poetry in Genesis. But this is the effect that it has.
Yeah,
This
it's good.
is
It's good to
why.
know. Even among SDAs, there
That's
is
right.
theistic evolution as well. It's like I don't
That's
know,
right.
I don't know how you can be a Seventh Day Adventist and believe in theistic evolution. Because it
Yeah.
goes against the very name that we claim.
Well, what is it, the fourth commandment? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord. In it you shall do no work, nor you, nor your son, your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, or stranger to their gates. And it goes for in 6 days. So notice it says,
It's 6
for in six
days.
days the Lord created the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. And therefore he rested on the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So notice that the idea is that you rest on the seventh day, you work 6 days as God created for 6 days and rested on the seventh. In other words, the very literal week for God is the very literal week for you. That's the argument in the fourth commandment. So
Yep.
when you decide to accept something that you put science or science falsely so
So
called over the
called.
Bible, you have problems.
Exactly. And that's where
A
we
lot
are.
of them. And so here's Kellogg talking about how society should establish laws against mental defectives, and again, eventually this will lead to abortion and Planned Parenthood and all the other stuff, which he was against early on. But I want you to see here, Kellogg really did embrace evolution, and in this book, Itinerary of Breakfast, he still holds on to the vegetarian diet. He holds on to that to the day he dies. I guess he knew that it was really good, but he talks about how evolution is a part of why we should eat a vegetarian diet. And so and I want to point this out here, even though he has accepted evolution, what I love is that he has a struggle with it. And the reason is that he studied anatomy and physiology, and he'd been a doctor too long, believing in God for too long to accept the idea of vestigial organs. He could not accept it. And so, what most people don't realize, because every time you talk about vestigial organs and evolution, they go, oh, the appendix, the appendix, the appendix. What they don't realize is there's about 100, so or maybe nearly close to 200. I think it was 183 is the total number of organs that people who believed in evolution thought that humans had. And one of them was the thyroid gland and also the pituitary gland. And I just want you to see Kellogg, he wanted to accept the theories of evolution, but even he couldn't go as far as they because he knew it was bad. He knew it was bad. He just knew because of his own studies. So he talks about the thyroid gland and he says, hey, it was essentially vestigial, but he goes, look, if you cut it away from a dog, they'll die. And he talks about the minute body in the brain, which is, he says, not larger than a pea, which is the pituitary gland. He's like, people think that you could take this out, but you can't. You can't. There's a problem with it. So he's trying to go against evolution while accepting it. And even the appendix, he's like, no. He's like, no, the appendix is being removed for no reason. For no reason, and it is important to the digestion and health of the people in the colon. So he's wrestling with this because he knows enough about anatomy and physiology that he can't go along with them with their vestigial organ, but he still wants to accept evolution because why? Well, when you walk away from God, the darkness that you are going to embrace is greater than you'd ever imagine. So I just had to point that out there with what he says. But I want you to see what he says here about man. So instead of man being created in the image of God, what does he say here? It says man is a primate, a member of a rather small family of animals, which possessing among other striking and peculiar characteristics, a pair of hands instead of feet attached to their anterior limbs. Nothing could be more evident than man should adhere to the same dietary as his near relatives, the big apes, these fruits, nuts, tender green shoots, grains, and succulent roots, adding milk and eggs. Now, the reason why he puts milk and eggs in there is because he knew that milk and eggs were actually very good for you, something that actually apes really don't eat. When
Yeah.
they're babies, they don't go around looking for eggs. They eat a lot of other stuff. But the point is that his argument for vegetarianism is now couched in evolution. And I've seen a lot of people in science try to couch their diets in evolution. Like it used to be, well, our nearest ancestor are the great apes, and they eat a lot of, vegetables and fruits and stuff like that. And now it's like, well, we know the caveman was eating mastodon. The caveman was a hunter-gatherer. And I'm like, well, wait, how do you know what the caveman ate? I go, because the people who built civilization didn't eat like that. The people, I can assure you, the people building the pyramids, and I think I'd much rather have their intellect than the supposed caveman. But it's all for naught because we don't know what they ate. They didn't leave any records behind. And on top of that, the caveman is a misnomer. Were there people who might have lived in caves? Possibly. But they also lived in caves while other people were building the pyramids.
Correct.
So I don't know what to tell you, man. It's just, this is what we've done. So, the whole thing that with the new pyramid is this idea that we're building a pyramid that is more in harmony with evolution.
Yep.
The idea that we're going to eat more meat because we know that the caveman ate more meat. The hunter-gatherers ate more meat. And what's funny is that when we find skeletal remains of the supposed caveman, and we look at their teeth and we take electron microscope and we examine their teeth, we find dental calculi, which is the buildup of certain plaque, and that plaque actually comes from grains. So we're actually finding that the very theory that they're telling us about meat eating all day is undermined by the actual evidence.
Oh my goodness.
It's crazy.
It is.
But again, this is what we get when we come up with a false theory of history.
Correct.
Thinking that mankind ran around hunting mastodon and eating it all day long and nothing else.
Yeah.
And again, it's not to say that mankind did not eat mastodon, but what it is to say is that people around the world mostly survived on plant-based diets, and it's still that very true today.
Amen.
Again, here he is again. Man is a primate, like the chimpanzee, orangutan, and gorilla, and he talks about everything they eat. Again, he all over and over again. We evolved. Here he is. The first mammals were plant eaters, and he talks about some Professor Matthews and how they might have eaten some insects, but they mostly ate fruits, nuts, all this stuff. Again, primates. Again, evolution is the reason why we shouldn't eat meat. But I want to stop to the very end here, and I want you to notice this, that even with that, they recognize that there were people who do not eat very much meat, and they live the longest. And this is what he says. And this is what you see in the blue zones. Whole races of men comprising many millions live their entire lives without meats of any sort, and when fed sufficient amount, are wonderfully vigorous, prolific, enduring, and intelligent. Witness the Brahmins of India, the Buddhists of China and Japan, and the teeming millions of Central Africa. And he's right. These people who live this way have incredible endurance, are able to do all these things, and obtain to a high degree of civilization and intelligence. So again, the point of the matter is that he knew this, but he's so married to evolution now because he's a eugenicist that he can't see past it. Again, here he is talking about the nature of man and his diet. This is 1923, and again, he's going to talk about the caveman and tracking all over the world and walking, and how he settled on more temperate climates so they could eat food that grew from plants and things like that. Again, he talks about it all. I'll read it right here. It says, hoping that this little treatise may be the means of convincing at least a few serious-minded people the disadvantage of high protein or meat dietary, thus enabling them to experience the marvelous physical and mental uplift which results from relieving the body of a great handicap imposed upon it by the swarms of pernicious germs and numerous virulent poisons always to be found in the colons of those who feed unbiologically. That means eat meat. The writer presents this book as a contribution to the cause of race betterment. So notice, back on the race betterment, back on eugenics, as a contribution to race betterment, by which alone will it be possible successfully to combat all the tide of race degeneracy, which is rapidly sweeping on toward the race extinction of every civilized nation of the world. So on one hand, he's like, hey, we should eat vegetarianism, but the real hero is eugenics, which is crazy. And again, here's more
Mm.
talking about the eating of meat and not eating meat. And again, mankind and apes, very, very strong on that. Quoting other professors,
Mm.
talking about the monkey. Again, this is important because without evolution, you do not have a case for eugenics, and so you have to accept that mankind comes from apes. And here he is doing a comparative anatomy. You can
Oh
see the
wow.
human skeleton next to the ape skeleton. There's even pictures of showing different types of human beings next to apes and saying, "Hey, they look like apes," and so this is the proof of evolution. What people don't understand is that they used to do those carnivals, whether it was Barnum and Bailey Circus or whatever, and they would actually select people from Africa and other nationalities, and they say, "Look, this is an ape man," or they used to have a young child who had I forget what disease he had, and he used to say, "Look, he's descended from apes." And they used to make all this money from doing that because of evolution. That's what they used to do.
Mm.
And again, we're always told, "Oh, the Christians are racist. The Christians did this." Kellogg left his faith when he did this. And somehow science today does not get the credit it deserves with all the evil that has come about from linking man to an animal. It
Yep.
just doesn't get the credit. Somehow it's like, well, we know Christians are racist. I'm like, wait a second. Christians never did any of this. It was
Nope.
people who were all about accepting evolution and thus saith the science that came up with some of the most racist and terrible policies that have ever been acted on human beings.
Yep.
But again, they don't get the credit. It's always Christians are bad, Christians are bad. The Bible's backwards, telling people not to masturbate is backwards. And I'm like, our society is falling apart, and I don't think we get why.
It's so true.
It's
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 so
just it's ridiculous.
yeah.
And again,
There's a question in the chat here. It says, "How
yeah.
much protein do you need? Do you think a person needs a day?"
That's really a good question. It depends on your age, depends on how much you're exercising.
Mhm.
It depends on what your goals are with it. Because a lot of people feel like you have to have a ton of protein. And what I say is that if you eat a well balanced diet, you will get all the protein you need. People think that protein is literally in meat or in something else, but there's proteins in vegetables. There's proteins in nuts, seeds. There's proteins. There's even proteins in almond milk. There's proteins in beans. There's proteins in mixing or. And let me be very clear. The other thing you need is not necessarily protein per se. You need amino acids. Your body is
Mhm.
going to assemble all the proteins you need uh, through amino acids. How is it a baby doesn't die from kwashiorkor or Kwashiorkor's disease, which is a protein deficiency? How is it babies don't die from that when they drink primarily milk? Well, there's proteins. There's proteins in mom's breast milk. So there's proteins in a lot of places, but let me back up. There's amino acids in a lot of places, and your body assembles them. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. Like for instance, there's people who have cancer, and they need additional protein because the cancer treatment they're having is killing them. There's people who are trying to add muscle, and they need to. But again, you can get a lot of these proteins from eating something like quinoa or getting your proper amino acid balance. So it kind of depends on what you want to do, and it's not the same for everyone. I think we come up. I forget what number we come up for most adults, but I would argue that that's usually on the much higher end. And really, what you need to consume is a well balanced diet that gives you the antioxidant capacity that you need and the amino acids you need. So you need the antioxidants to repair. You need the amino acids to build all the proteins and things that you absolutely need. So that's my view on it.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
There's another question. Are they still smoking clinics under Adventist? I don't think you said that, did you?
No,
Smoking
no, there's
clinics?
not smoking clinics. No, no, no. We hold clinics for people to quit smoking. So
Correct.
some of the hospitals will allow a room to be used in it where they will have someone come in and they'll have groups to help people to quit smoking, and a lot of it's a support group, to help you change your behaviors and convince you of why you should stop. So we still do that, and some churches used to do it, which I'm surprised that more churches don't do it. I think part of it is because a lot of people don't smoke, but I think now what's happening is a lot of children and people are vaping, and I think that's going to be the tip of the iceberg when we realize that vaping wasn't so good for us either. I have a patient who uh, had a son who did a lot of vaping early on, and it ended up causing him to have terrible COPD, and it cut his life short. I think he died in his 50s. So and he was breathing oxygen. He couldn't even get up to walk. He was breathing, had to breathe oxygen all the time because the oil from the vapes got into his alveoli, and you couldn't get it out. You can't just take a vacuum and suck it all out. It's stuck in there. And so I have no doubt that when we look back on the whole vaping, we're going to find that this is going to cause a huge
Mm.
spike in COPD. And we'll see. And I know people are like, oh, it doesn't affect me. Does Yeah, well, that's what people thought a long time ago with other things. And
Yeah, just give it enough time.
just give it enough time.
Yeah, you'll see. Yeah, but we're hoping that these are something people could overcome. Yeah, because vaping right now among teenagers has definitely increased. Because
Yep.
cigarette smoking has gotten so much more expensive, and
Yep.
now vaping is the cheaper way to go about it. So, yeah,
Yep. And it doesn't have the same social stigma. I mean, like you can vape and you don't smell like the way you do if you smoke cigarettes.
yeah,
You just don't smell that way. And it's difficult to know the level of nicotine and other chemicals that you're getting in your body. I imagine it's got to be even greater because you could sit there and just suck on that thing. They make them like they used to make them like thin like a cigarette. Now they're like a box.
yeah.
You know, like I'll drive behind people on the road and like I sometimes I think their car's on fire because there's like a cloud of smoke
Yeah.
coming. I'm like, man, is that guy's radio on fire? Like, what's going on? No, just vaping.
Vaping.
So,
Wow.
yeah,
Whew, mercy. All right.
yeah. So I'm sure that's going to be one, and yeah, we'll see. I mean, again, we should be a little bit more vigilant.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, so you can just see again, even his vegetarian was couched in evolution. And he goes through again the different cultures and how they don't consume that much meat and they live a long time. But he's very much talking about how the nearest animal relatives to humans, again, a tenet of evolution, proves that vegetarian diet is the way to go versus where before. So this is in his book, The Living Temple. Now, this book is full of pantheism. But I want you to show this that so as he's on the cusp of leaving the church in 1903, I think he's done in 1902. This book was published in 1903. But I just want you to see this that even as he's leaving the church, there's still some light from the Bible in his mind, and I want you to see what he says here. Okay, so this book is the beginning of his apostasy. What we were looking at before, he's way down the road. He's 20 years down the road in some of this. Okay, but I want you to just look at what I highlighted here. He says, man cannot be classed with the lions, tigers, apes, kangaroos, jackals, and other beasts of the field. He is not simply an extraordinary ape, a cooking animal, as one has said. He is a creation by himself, a son of God, and born a king.
Wow.
What a difference.
What a difference from later on in his life.
From later on in his life. And again, even this has some of the tint, the tint of pantheism, but I just want you to see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So again, none of the criticism that's ever brought out ever gets this far. It's always, these low hanging fruits that really, realistically, when we study it, we're like, well, that's not as bad as you said it was.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, so he goes on and he talks about all the things about the. I'll just read this here. He talks about man's diet. He says, while it is true that various food elements required for the use of the body may be obtained from both animal and vegetable kingdoms, it is by no means to be supposed that it is a matter of indifference from which source their food is derived. Granting then that man's natural dietary is derived from the vegetable kingdom, we must still, so this is when he's still believing, we must still recognize the fact that all vegetable products are not equally well adapted to support human life and activity. In Genesis 1:29, we read, behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. The most thoroughgoing scientific research upon this question leads most certainly and unequivocally to the conclusion that the dictum of Holy Writ in relation to man's diet is an expression of a profound biological fact. Many eminent authorities who have studied this question exhaustively have borne testimony to this fact. So I just want you to understand this. When he was a Christian, he believed that what the Bible said was scientifically validated. And when he says many eminent authorities have studied this question exhaustively and borne the testimony of this fact, He's not kidding. They did. And so so when people say, well, Adventists came up with this, no. Adventists took this truth and we adopted it and put it into our church and enshrined it as something that was very important. Other Christian denominations let it go. But the more that Kellogg did in studying it and promoting it, he was convinced for a time that Genesis 1:29 was not simply descriptive, but has also had prescriptive qualities as well.
Wow.
So very powerful. Again, it's almost sad when you read this because you see the light that the man had, only to see him talking about monkeys and apes and eugenics and evolution, and it almost breaks. It actually doesn't almost. It breaks your heart to see how far he is. Now, I put this in here. This is important to note here because Kellogg does have a view on vaccines. He does, and his view changes over time. In the book that I co-authored, I take him up to about. I go through his views until about 1902, and then I don't mention anything, but I could have. And so in the book, we talk about all of his views, and I'll share some here. But there's something very important about this. This is Buck v. Bell. This is a case that was argued before the Supreme Court, and it was basically about a woman who had a number of children, and she was gonna be forcibly sterilized by the state so that she could not have any more children. Okay. And I want you to see the justification for this law, which enshrined eugenics by the Supreme Court in 1927. Listen to the justification for this law. We have seen more than once that the public welfare may call upon the best citizens for their lives. It would be strange if it could not call upon those who have already sapped the strength of the state for their lesser sacrifices, often not felt to be such by those concerned in order to prevent our being swamped with incompetence. It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is broad enough to cut the fallopian tubes. So what is he saying here?
Oh, boy.
In other words, he's saying that we shouldn't have to execute people for their crimes or watch them starve because they can't get a job or whatever. We should go ahead and stop this immediately. When we have defective people, we should allow them to be sterilized. The state has the authority, the duty to sterilize. And how do they justify it? If the state has the right to inject a needle in your arm, it has the right to cut your fallopian tubes and sterilize.
Wow.
That's why it says 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. And this has never been overturned by any Supreme Court. Never. Now, I know that people say, well, that wouldn't be, but let me be very clear. This reasoning here
Is
still in force. In other words, the reasoning is if the state can say to you that you need to make a sacrifice for the greater good, whatever that is, the state can do it. And let me be very clear. While many individual states in the United States have laws on the books which protect religious and medical liberty, there are other states that do not. And in those states that do not, you also have to understand that the medical societies have argued quite vigorously that they should be able to treat people against their own will. And many of these psychiatric confinement statutes, people being committed against their own will, all have their justification in this. Additionally, there's been other case law that has demonstrated where if a young adult or like a child before the age of 18 gets cancer and the parents don't want their child to be treated the usual way, that the state has the authority to come in and take the child away from the parents and force chemotherapy into the arteries or into the veins of that young child. They have the right to do it. So just because you think that eugenics is gone doesn't mean the state hasn't used the same reasoning to force medical treatment, and I put medical treatment in quotations, on those who do not want it. There was a famous case of Sarah Hirschberger, who was an Amish young girl. She was 17. She had cancer, and she was declining as they were giving her all the drugs that they wanted to give her, completely declining. And her parents said, hey, why don't we get a second opinion? We should get a second opinion because this isn't working. Our daughter's getting sicker and sicker. Please let us do something. And think about it. The parents are asking the doctors to do something, which demonstrates that they already understand that they don't have the right. They don't have the right to decide their child's own treatment. And the doctors said, no, we're following the science, and your child is going to get the chemotherapeutics that we want her to have. And so they went to court, and the court sided with the doctors that she needed to have. Now the Amish, God love them, they didn't take that sitting down. They may not have guns, they may not enact violence, but they did what they knew best. They put her on a plane or a truck or bus, and they shipped her all the way to Mexico. And they did not let her come back until she was 18. And she received treatment in Tijuana, and when she came back, her cancer was gone.
Wow.
And the state contemplated arresting her parents and charging them with contempt of court, but I don't know if that ever happened. But I'm pointing this out here because the theory of eugenics and evolution still undergirds medical statutes in the state. Still does. So just think that didn't go away. Remember, everyone, don't forget what happened in 2021, 2022, where people lost their jobs because they didn't want to put something that was experimental in their arms. And some of the drugs were actually taken off the market for being shown dangerous. They actually pulled a couple products off the market for being dangerous, and people were like, hey, we don't want to do this. And this is where the whole issue of religious liberty and Christian denominations standing for it is very, very sad, because it's this type of thinking we should always resist. But anyways, I digress. I just want you to see this because notice his opinion about vaccines, how it changes. All right. So this is in a book in 1917 called 1,000 Questions Answered. And he talks about boils, and he comes up with this thing, because again, in part 1, you would have seen all the things he wrote about vaccination. You'll see it here. It's very small, all the things he wrote about it and what he thought. And he's actually very fair. He's not an anti-vaccinationist in the sense that he doesn't believe that vaccines don't have some sort of scientific basis. What he was absolutely against was for forced vaccination. So he was against that. But he was not, and he also believed that it could be dangerous in certain times. But anyway, so he talks about boils and diseases, and then he comes up with this idea of how to treat it. And then what he thinks about it, so he talks about the type of diet you should eat, how that's going to help. But then he talks about something called an autologous vaccine, which is where you essentially take the pus of the boil and you mix it in something and you drink it. And because he's buying into this idea that this is what you need. So he comes up with this idea. So he starts believing it, taking pus or something else prepared from the effluvia, which is whatever drains out of the body, and using that to then either shoot back in the arm or drink it so that your body can be prepared for these things. And this is how bad he gets believing in that. Unless he even puts it right here. The so-called cure is greatly facilitated by the so-called endogenous vaccines prepared for cultures made from pus taken from diseased areas. That's what he believes. So again, this is against everything he would have believed before. This is the guy who established, aseptic, no bacteria surgery centers. And then he's like, yeah, take a little pus from your body and squirt it back into your arm somewhere else. That's going to fight it. And I want you to see this. This is him. This is him after he's accepted evolution, after he's believed in eugenics. Does vaccination prevent smallpox? Answer. Vaccination unquestionably mitigates the evils of smallpox. When proper care is taken to perform vaccination with good virus, there is very little chance, indeed, of any of ill consequences arising from it. Now, I want you to see this because this was published early on. This is in 1902, all right? So I want you to see this because he had a different opinion in 1902 versus in the 1920s. Listen to what he says here. And this is not a guy who didn't live through smallpox. It's not a guy that didn't see germs developing everywhere. He was there through the whole ride. He got to see it all. And he firmly believed in hydrotherapy, diet, exercise, sunlight, fresh air. He firmly believed in it. And he used that intensely. But listen to what he says here. Danger in vaccination. Vaccination is probably looked upon by the majority of people as a very trifling matter, but it may become dangerous is evidenced by the death of 7 out of 9 children vaccinated in New Jersey town, the cause being tetanus. Now, what people don't get is that a lot of people did get tetanus from smallpox vaccination. He's talking about it. He says whether the tetanus was derived from the vaccine or from the skins of the victim is not known and probably never will be. Vaccination is at best inoculation of the body with toxic elements Unless the nicest care is taken in the preparation of the vaccine material and its application, blood poisoning may occur in any case. Vaccine points are often infected with germs capable of producing the most dangerous forms of blood poisoning. And not infrequently, the operation of vaccination is performed without any proper attention to asepsis. The real wonder is that the immediate serious results are not more often seen. In 1902, he's like, hey, there's danger here. The 1920s, no problem. Even take pus from your own body, inject it back in. Notice the difference.
Wow.
Evolution and eugenics. That's the difference. Here it is in 1925, all right? 1925, and he's writing this book with another gentleman from the University of Wisconsin. This is what he says. Vaccination has proved to be a very valuable means of combating infectious diseases. By its use, such dreadful maladies as smallpox have been almost entirely suppressed in the civilized countries. Formerly, when smallpox appeared in the community, it usually continued until every susceptible person, that is, everyone who had not previously had the disease, was affected by it. Now, when an outbreak occurs, the sick persons are carefully isolated or quarantined by the health officials, and only those who have been vaccinated or who have had the disease are allowed to come in contact with them. Everybody who has been exposed to the disease is vaccinated, and thus the disease is prevented from extending. And when the sick person is recovered, the community gets rid of the infection quickly. It will be thus seen that vaccination is a real blessing, since it has been the means of saving millions of lives. Fortunately, it is a harmless preventative. It is true that when a person is vaccinated, few smallpox germs are injected in his skin, but the germs, having come from a calf instead of a human being, are so modified that they cannot go through the human body as the human vaccine product. So notice he's all about millions of lives being saved, all this other stuff. Okay. Yes. So he goes through there, and then I'll skip to the last paragraph. He goes, some people who do not understand about vaccination and the great benefit to be derived from it oppose it and use it as protection against smallpox. The opponents of vaccination are not usually well-informed people, but rather those who have fears have been aroused by misrepresentation of facts. There is a reason to believe that thorough vaccination and quarantine of smallpox will be finally completely conquered and exterminated. So he's very much high on the vaccine. And what's funny is that he used to be one of those people who was actually very well informed and thought that vaccines weren't good. But he's changed himself. And what has changed? Not his DNA, eugenics, evolution. That is what has changed. Now, here is his book, which he wrote in 1896. All right. And I'm just highlighting his former opinion here. This is what he says. In some countries, he's a Seventh-day Adventist. He's with the church. He believes in God. In some countries, vaccination is made compulsory by law. This has aroused vigorous opposition on the part of those who are opposed to the practice, and at the present time, efforts are being made, especially in England and Scotland, to secure repeal of compulsory laws. The anti-vaccinators are not wholly unsustained in their efforts. Quite a number of eminent. So notice he said there was no one who was, well informed. Notice what he says here. A quite number of eminent English physicians have taken a stand in opposition to the practice. Quite recently, a petition was signed by several hundred physicians and was presented to the English Parliament calling for the repeal of the obnoxious laws, which did happen in 1899. It is probable that the benefits of vaccination on one hand, and on the other, its evils, have been considerably exaggerated. It may be considered as thoroughly settled, however, that vaccination with human virus, that is, scabs or matter taken from the sore produced in persons by vaccination, should be entirely discarded, and that bovine virus alone, if any, should be employed. So here he is in 1896 saying the anti-vaccinationists have made a good point, and he calls the compulsory laws obnoxious. So that's what he was saying in 1896. What a change. This is in 1937. This is good health. And I want you to see this here, all right? I want you to see this. This is very important because, again, it's 1937. He's still alive, and he believes in eugenics. He believes in evolution. He's 100% behind vaccines. I want you to see this. It's very important. He's talking about the new vaccines being developed. And he says this, Dr. Stanley is continuing his work, and there seems to be ground for expecting that the ultimate results of his research will be the discovery of a means by which serum or vaccine may be produced by the use which such maladies as influenza, infantile paralysis, or polio, yellow fever, or the common cold. Didn't we have a vaccine for coronavirus? I don't know. And other maladies which exactly. which are believed to be produced by non-filterable viruses, may be prevented and perhaps cured by immunization. This discovery, if it proves to be at all that is hoped for, it may lead to the undreamed of progress in combating human infirmities. At this present time, we are helpless in spite of all that science and hygiene can do for us. I just have to stop right there. Notice he said at this time we are helpless in the spite of science and hygiene. Kellogg would have never said that back in the day. Never said that. He felt that hygiene and eating well and science and living well were enough. But notice what he says now. At the present time, we are helpless in spite of all that science and hygiene can do for us in the presence of certain so-called specific microorganisms, germs, and viruses possessed of such virulence that natural immunity breaks down in their presence. Even the most meticulous attention to diet and other health requisites will not render one immune to smallpox, measles, or any other malady, specific or contagious malady.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? Because that's the exact opposite of what he wants.
You could tell he lost all faith, even in the health message.
Even in the health message. Dr. Stanley's discovery may possibly lead the way to the filling the gap in our advance against microorganisms,
Seriously?
the most numerous and dangerous of all enemies of human life. Again, total change. What changed? Evolution and eugenics.
What was Dr. Stanley's discovery about that he found to be credible?
I think he was starting to discover the small particles which we now call viruses. So that's the idea. Yeah. So and I think, let's see, he probably says right here. Yes. Yeah. So this is where, what most people don't understand is that we did not possess the microscopic technology to see viruses, not until the 1940s. So this was published in 1937. So we were just starting to be able to see viruses, which begs the question, what was in that smallpox vaccine that we were giving for so many years where we didn't even know we could not see viruses? We couldn't see it. So we didn't even know what was in it. And doctors and researchers have now questioned. They said, well, how in the world did this ever prevent smallpox if from what we know, it may not have ever contained any of the smallpox viruses? We don't even know.
Yes.
So because they didn't possess it then. So that's what Dr. Stanley's discovery is, that they were able to start to see glimpses of these viruses, which they could not see before.
Got it.
Now, I want you to see this in 1899 before the General Conference. He's a believer. I want you to hear what he says about the difference between the health message and vaccination, right? Because he gives a whole talk about a young girl who gets bitten by a snake, and the snake bites her and injects her with venom, and she shakes it off and says, look, the venom doesn't do anything to me, doesn't do anything to me. And Kellogg says this is kind of like a young boy who smokes, who doesn't notice the effects of it, but it's doing damage to his body. And he says this is the same thing that he feels with the smallpox vaccine, that while it looks like for some people doesn't do anything to him, he felt that it made the body weaker. And so, this is what he believed in 1899. The whole article is there. You can find it. I've gone on in length in other videos, but I'm just showing you the conclusion that he has here. All right.
Oh yeah.
So he's gonna contrast the health message to vaccination, and this is what he said. This is the vaccination method. This method of fighting disease with disease is the human way of meeting disease, just as we fight fire with fire. But God has given us a truth that has in it the power to lift a man above the power of disease. He has given us principles which, if we obey and follow, will change our bodies so that we shall not have to be vaccinated. That will lift the body above the power of disease and above the power of sin. For sin and disease go along together. Disease is the consequence of sin, and sin induces a moral disease.
All right.
Notice, it just completely contradicted himself.
Absolutely. What a difference.
What a difference. And like I said, evolution, eugenics. Now, I want you to see this here. So this is in 1884. And so Pasteur and others were trying to figure out a way to isolate yellow fever and create a vaccine. And they couldn't because they could not find viruses. They did not have the ability to isolate and locate viruses, which is what he's celebrating in 1937. All right. But listen to what Kellogg almost is going to seem like a prophet in this quote here. Right.
Wow.
This is going to blow you away because, again, he was so ahead of the curve on so many things. And it boils my blood to hear people talking about, veggie meat and masturbation. And I'm like, what? Have you even read anything that he wrote? But anyways, It's annoying. So, anyways, he goes, according to the reports in the medical journal, a South American doctor claims to have discovered the contagious principle for yellow fever and proposes to check the ravages of the disease by the same method first employed against smallpox. It is claimed that there have been more than 200 successful inoculations, which none of that's true. They were not able to do that, and people died when they were doing that. But he's just reporting what the medical news is saying. Pasteur is busy engaged in vaccinating for hydrophobia, which is rabies. When this vaccination business gets fully developed, it will become an immense industry. Let me just read that again. Read that again. Pasteur is busy vaccinating for hydrophobia, which is rabies. And notice what he says about the industry of vaccination. When this vaccination business gets fully developed, it will become an immense industry. Every town will have its public vaccinators and vaccinatory, and it may become fashionable for people to spend a considerable portion of their early years in taking special courses in vaccination. When the thing gets well underway, it is barely possible that some old fogey will raise the query whether the remedies may not be as bad or worse than the diseases that they are supposed to cure. But every scientific sanitarium will cry, put him out. And if public sentiment is sufficiently advanced, he will probably be arrested as a nuisance and as an enemy to public health unless he mildly submits to allow his body to be infected with the viruses of kindpox, the attenuated germs of diphtheria, the contagium vivum of typhoid fever, the modified poison of rabies. Will such a day really come? Notice he's predicting.
That is prophetic. You're
Isn't
so
it
right.
prophetic? That's what I'm saying. Like he understood. This is what I mean. Ahead of the curve. Totally ahead of the curve.
Yeah, the babies are born. We like, okay, poke, poke. And now the same thing they're trying to do with COVID vaccines now. We have all these around like every year. You need to get one of those. Add it to the list.
It's now normal with the flu shot. So again, he called it. He called the shot. He nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a difference. In 1884, when he wrote that, he was a firm believer in Christ. He was following God. He did not believe in evolution. He did not believe in eugenics. 1937, totally different man. So here we are. This is the Battle Creek Enquirer and News. This is published in December 16th, 1943. This is when Kellogg died. And I highlighted the parts of this is front page. This is the front page of the newspaper. And you can see that it was big news that Kellogg had died because he was so influential. And this is during World War II. And this is part of the different people writing in eulogies.
What was the cause of his death? Was it old age?
Yeah, I think it may say here. Let me see, because I thought he might have had pneumonia or something. I think he got a cold and he got pneumonia. I think he was 96. So
okay.
And it says right here. It says Kellogg died at 11:30 p.m. on Tuesday at his residence, 202 Manchester, with an illness, 3 days with pneumonia. So obviously he's 96 years old, so it made sense. But the fact of the matter is he was hoping to write books and do all this other stuff. But you see, like U.S. Senator Arthur Vandenberg writes about Kellogg. Listen to what it says. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg was one of the truly great men of his time, great in his profession, great in his humanities, great in his citizenship. The world is better for his having lived in infinitely poorer by his death. We all have lost a rare benefactor and a precious friend. Now, I believe in that in part, but I think a lot of friends that Kellogg made were also people who believed in eugenics like he did.
That's what I was gonna say. What led to his fall away? Because I know, I wonder how he even began to adapt pantheism, which led to atheism and evolution. How did he even get there? I wonder, does it have to do with the studies, with the scientific research as he's done? And
I don't know exactly. What I can imagine is that pantheism leads to undermining of the Bible. When the Bible is no longer your guidance, it's no longer your textbook to understand physiology, and you start putting science above the Bible. Well, it just would make sense. It just makes sense. And remember, he also rejected the light from the spirit of prophecy. So when you start rejecting light, you start getting deeper and deeper in the darkness. And he did. And so to me, it's not a surprise in the sense that once you start to undermine the Bible, you end up in this place. I mean, again, there's people right now who call themselves Christians and believe in evolution, and they have some of the worst views about all these different matters because the Bible is no longer their guide. It's no longer their lamp by their feet and a light under their path. It is no longer something that they should look as a look at as a bright light in a dark place until the day star rises in their hearts. It's no longer that, the sure thing of the prophetic word. It's none of that anymore. It's not the counsel of holiness. It's nothing. And again, this is the temptation that all Christians face, is that we are keen to elevate secular wisdom above the Bible, science over the word of God, as if science hasn't had its truly terrible parts in the past in history, and truly terrible ideas that have come about. We just seem to ignore it and think, well, science is great. And so I want you to see this. So here are people that definitely believed in eugenics.
Okay.
And these people also wrote. The other people I could not verify, but the ones that I did certainly did.
Look at the first name, John D. Rockefeller. I'm like, oh, of course you're going to make the list, top of the list.
Listen to what he says. From New York, I am deeply saddened to learn of the death of John Harvey Kellogg. My warm friend for many years throughout his long and fruitful life has devoted himself in countless ways to the relief of human suffering and prolongation of human life. What do you think that meant? I mean, I don't think it was hydrotherapy that John D. Rockefeller was talking about, but eugenics. That's what he was talking about. And this shows you that when you go down, you may have these celebrated friends, but you're in the wrong crowd, and you might be resurrected with them. That's all I have to say.
No, I heard the allegation a little bit before his death. He might have reconverted. We don't know how true that is. Yeah,
I have not read that.
Yeah,
I mean, I know there was a lot of regret, but I have not read that. I mean, it could possibly be true, but I don't know. Yeah. His many friends, known and unknown, unknown friends, throughout the length and breadth of the land, will mourn his going and his memory. Dale Carnegie, he was another eugenics. He's the guy who wrote the book.
How to Win a Friend.
Friends and influence people. People love.
Yeah, I've read that book, man. That's a powerful book. But if you separate it from scripture, it becomes it's like a propaganda. But there's a lot of powerful principles in that book. I'm like, yo, there's stuff in there. It's Christian without the Bible verse. Of course, it's man centered, but it's Christian principles anyway.
It's the same thing. Like I started to read Napoleon's Hill book, and I was like, wait a second, this is. And again, I want to point this out. There's some good advice in there, but the point is that it's all without God. It's all without.
That's right. Yeah, it is man-centered.
And so again, when you do that, when you think that you can tie your success as a Christian, what does it say in James? He says, "Do not say, 'Let us go here and there and start a business or commit an enterprise,' but rather say, 'If God wills, let us go here and there.'" In other words, what is God going to direct us to do? You have to put your trust in Him, and so. These guys, thinking about it, they definitely were smart. I mean, look, I've read stuff by John D. Rockefeller about hard work and perseverance, and you're like, man, that's powerful. But without God, it brings you to the same place that all these guys are going.
Yeah,
and it's sad. So this is what he says: "I was shocked and distressed to hear of Dr. Kellogg's death. Few men have lived fuller and happier lives. There's an old saying that you are old when you talk about what you have done instead of what you are going to do. Judged by that rule, Dr. Kellogg was young to the last. When he was 88, he told me his plans to build an addition to his sanitarium and his plans of a new book. Dr. Kellogg's life was an inspiration to countless thousands. One of America's most outstanding citizens have passed on." Yes, Dale Carnegie was a eugenicist. Professor Irving Fisher from Yale was a eugenicist. As Dr. Kellogg was a lifelong friend, few others had so great of influence on my health, my thinking, my philosophy of life. I have long regarded him as one of the genuinely great men of his time. He was great not only in his ability and versatility, but also, more important, he was a great character and usefulness to his fellow men. Many of his activities have never been known. Wonder what those are. Never been known outside of a small circle of friends. If the history through 3/4 of a century of his usefulness to mankind is ever written, it will be a record of the high endeavor and achievement such as rarely bless this afflicted world. And Dr. Emil Loeffler, another eugenicist. I'm going to show you here. There's more tributes to Kellogg, and this one is interesting because this is done by the American Medical Association.
Wow.
So remember, the American Medical Association, the association that promoted smoking, and the American Medical Association with Morris Fishbein, who's the gentleman writing this eulogy, would later persecute people who wanted to do things that Kellogg used to do.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to use hydrotherapy to treat diseases. I mean, so in other words, what I'm pointing out here is that when Kellogg started to believe in evolution eugenics, he made friends in places that you would not want to make friends in places. And
Yep.
he is being celebrated by the American Medical Association for his work on eugenics, his other work that he did in supporting all that. So it's interesting to see that, because we have to ask ourselves about our own form of medicine. Are we getting praise from the world because we're like them, or because we're standing in contrast to them?
Yeah.
And that's really the case.
That's a big question.
Big question. So I'm going to wrap it up, and I just want you to see this. So this is 1902 versus 1937.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And again, 1902 is the beginning of his apostasy. It's the beginning where he goes into pantheism. But I want you to see what he believed in 1902, and then just compare it a little bit to 1937, just to highlight this. The healing power, says Dr. Kellogg, is the creative power that formed the body in the first place. Physicians do not and cannot heal. All the physicians and remedies can do is aid in removing the cause of disease and supplying favorable conditions. The most important measure which can be employed in dealing with the sick may be said to be baths, exercise, and diet. That's what he said. And now in 1937, talking about germs and viruses. This discovery, if it proves to be all that is hoped for, may lead to an undreamed of progress in combating human infirmities. At the present time, we are helpless in spite of all the science and hygiene can do for us in the presence of certain so-called specific microorganisms, germs, viruses, and possessed of such virulence that natural immunity breaks down even in their presence. Even the most meticulous attention to diet and other health requisites will not render one immune to smallpox, measles, or any other specific or contagious malady. What a change. What a change. And so I leave here because I think it's important to see what happens when you go off the rails, when you turn your back on God, when how would I put it, when you're guided by the sparks of your own kindling, and you're going on to become one with the science of the day. It ends up being embarrassing what you become from where you started. And it's very sad to me because it didn't have to be that way. He could have continued to lead. He could have continued to guide people, but instead, eugenicists, evolutionists, pro-mandatory vaccines, and that aspect of his history doesn't get enough light as far as I'm concerned.
That was beautiful, man. That was powerful. Wow.
I appreciate it. God,
thank you so much,
bless.
man. You just put us to school tonight. I won't hold you any longer because, yeah, that was amazing. I gotta go back and study, man. To do those type of research, that takes time and study.
Yes, it does. But it's like you say, God, if you're willing to put in the elbow grease, God will anoint your way. You think about it, the people prayed for rain in the time of Elijah, and when it finally rained because Elijah prayed, they still had to dig their fields, plant their seeds. So God brings the rain, God brings the sunlight.
Yes.
But he expects you to put in the work. He expects you to put in the work. Amen. And that's what we're supposed to do. So yeah.
Appreciate
Real
you.
blessed. Yep.
Dr. Tim Perenich, once again, God bless you, my friend. Appreciate you. This was very insightful. And thank you for correcting the record here on Redacted and also educated our minds. So how else can people get in touch with you? I know you very busy man.
Yeah, I have a Rumble channel on I think it's called Restoring the Right Hand, which is all on the mandatory vaccine issue and some basically health related. And then so I've been trying to do more videos, but I haven't been able to do those. And then I started one called Prophetic History and Bible and Biblical Archaeology. So I did that because I want to help people to see that there's many reasons to trust the Bible. If you're gonna make a decision which is gonna bring you in conflict with friends and family and governments, you had better know that you can trust in the Bible. So I did that. And then I recently wrote a book It's called Light Bulbs for Professionals, and it's written for a secular audience.
Okay.
So it's kind of like we were talking about Dale Carnegie and
Yeah.
trying to reach people who are interested in business. And so what I did is I took 52 stories, all based in history and nature, to demonstrate how it teaches us proper business principles.
Mm.
And I did that because as I started my own practice, I had to learn a lot, and I can tell you I would not have been able to do it without God. I would not recommend anyone do things the way that I've done it, but God has been faithful in sustaining my practice and growing it. So I believe that there are ways to do it.
So best place to find your book is your website?
You can go, well, that book is on Scamazon. The other book, the best place to find it on, the vaccination book, Light Bulbs for Professionals. You can just probably type in my name.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, you might find it. Let's see. Oh wow! So they don't have it. They've actually hit it. You may have to scroll down a little bit further. Yeah. They actually hit it. So you probably have to type in the exact title, Light Bulbs for Professionals, and just type my last name, Perenich.
Yeah.
Then it'll come up. Yeah, this is the
Light
fun
Bulbs
part.
on Professionals.
Yeah. For
professionals.
Yeah. See.
That's the one. Just light bulbs.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I love it.
That's
all right.
amazing. This is Amazon for you. Just delete the Dr. Timothy and just
it is.
It's pay to play, man.
It really is. I heard a lot of people saying that to get in front of the line like that, it's a constant battle. It's a constant battle.
Yeah,
it's just like Google.
Yeah, it is. It's only the big players get noticed. You may want to select books and then just type in my last name and it should come up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's again, you have to pay in order for people to find your stuff. And you're like, well, what are we doing here?
Yeah. And if you have a fan base already, it's best you promote it on your website. Yeah. But again, they can't just randomly find it. They only recommend the big boy stuff. Nope. Still not coming up. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's amazing. Maybe we get rid of Dr. Perenich or just Doctor. Type in my last name, see if it comes up. Because both of those books are still there. I mean, the digital version. That's amazing.
That is Perenich. Wow.
There's that one.
That's the first one.
Yeah, that's the first one. Yeah, that's only it's a digital.
Let me share that with the audience here. Yeah, it's a fight on Amazon.
Yeah, it really is.
To get your stuff.
Yeah.
Let me see. Yeah. There we go.
They go down. Let's see.
Okay, so this is one.
Yeah.
No, that's all he gives me. Interesting.
That's amazing.
Yeah, if you have a link, send it to me, and then I'll make a post about that and
promote
it here.
Yeah,
it's an interesting book. Yeah, I can help put in the chat so people can check it out.
Yeah,
and I also put the Rumble link in the chat for those of you who love Rumble. You get more free speech on Rumble for now.
Yeah, for now, sure.
Until the moneyed man come over and buy into that system.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not. Yeah. No, that is. Yeah. Yeah, let me know if you can put it in the chat for me, and then I'll pull it up quickly, and then you can get out of here.
Okay, so I found it. Yeah, I'll do the screen share so people can actually see it.
Okay.
Here it is right there. So that's what it looks like.
All right. Light bulbs for professionals. Okay, let me see if I can pull that up. Light bulbs for professionals. Wow.
They're smart.
Yeah. I thought you had a website as well, don't you?
Not for that.
Not for that.
Because I wrote it for a secular audience. I think if I write anything else, I'm gonna I enjoyed writing it. It was definitely for a different audience, but it was a little bit out of my comfort. I think if I write again, I'll write a little bit stronger for.
Yeah. Okay. It comes up like a devotional.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah. I found it. That is great. Do they have this on Kindle? I've been enjoying.
Yeah, they do. And I was trying to do a audio version, but I haven't.
Kindle Unlimited. Okay, I get that. Yeah, I've been enjoying Kindle. I get some physical copies, but it's a lot of books. It's good to give them on Kindle. All right. I'm gonna put a link. Guys, in the chat, there's gonna be a link to Dr. Tim's Perenich book. For those of you who are interested. That will be great. Oh, this has been good. I really appreciate this time we spent together. Yeah. Hey, you gotta bring back part 1. But I give you some time. So, I'll reach back out. All right, would you mind have a closing word of prayer for us here as we end?
Not at all.
All right.
Gracious and Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for the time that we've been able to spend together. I just ask, Lord, that you be with us, each and every one of us, Lord. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg is a cautionary tale that we can ascend to certain positions in this world where we don't feel our need for you anymore. And it shows us what happens when we let go of our hold on biblical truth, that the depth of where we can descend is worse than we could ever imagine. And we would end up promoting things that are considered some of the greatest evils on this earth. And while it was true of Kellogg, it can be true for us. Help us, Lord, not to have our hearts lifted up. Help us, Lord, not to think higher than ourselves. And most importantly, Lord, help us not to be praised by the world for the wrong things because we sound like it, but help us to stand distinctively to the world and go about things the way that you would have us, that we may receive praise from you and not from men. We ask this in Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen and amen. All right, my friend. God bless you. You have a good night. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Have a good night. All right, bye-bye. All right, have a good one. Praise the Lord.